Sup, everyone, Wave here. Today we got this one right here, Open World Fatigue, Elden Ring and the Ubisoft formula. Let's react to it.
I've got a confession to make. I like Ubisoft games.
What?
For as long as I can remember, I've loved exploring their open worlds and causing as much mayhem within them as possible.
Damn, for me it got stale after a while. I can't play a Ubisoft game anymore.
With the release and
They need to be a bit more creative, come on.
tremendous success of From Software's Elden Ring, I learned of a phrase that I'd never heard before: the Ubisoft formula. Obviously, it wasn't lost on me that Ubisoft's games play similarly, but I didn't quite grasp what people meant when they talked about their formula. I came to realize that this was because I experience Ubisoft games a bit differently than the average player. Today, we're going to talk about open world design, why Elden Ring is such a breath of fresh air, how Ubisoft's games are designed,
Bro, even in Elden Ring the open world is not really that great in my opinion.
and why so many people, including myself, are so burnt out on the open world genre.
Same.
This is
Disgusting.
Open World Fatigue, Elden Ring, and the Ubisoft formula. There is no game that has had as much impact on the design of modern open world games as Far Cry 3. While it could be argued that
I love that title. Just because of Vast.
everyone is still chasing the standards set over 20 years ago by Rockstar and Grand Theft Auto 3, it's Ubisoft's template that has permeated the industry. So, what is the Ubisoft formula? The Ubisoft formula is the sequence of objectives that creates their open world gameplay loop. After an introduction to the game's characters and conflict, a Ubisoft game will open its world to the player and mark areas of interest on their map. These interest points range from enemy-based
Yeah, and it's simply the same game over and over again, just with a different story and different map. And that's it.
loot spots,
Not unique at all.
exploratory puzzles, and fetch quests. Exploring new areas on the map and cycling through their set of activities to
And the UI as well, I don't like it at all in Ubisoft games.
gather resources for use during the game's main and side quests is how you play and complete an open world Ubisoft game. Now, why did I not completely understand what the Ubisoft formula was when I first heard of it? This is actually quite simple. I play all of Ubisoft's open world games with as little HUD elements as possible, and I rarely ever look at the map while playing. This is Far Cry 3 gameplay that I recorded in 2018.
Yeah, but they should even take the possibility out to see that shit on the map. That's why Elden Ring is so amazing. They don't have all those markers on the map. You can place them manually, but it's nothing which clearly shows you the way, you know?
And you'll notice that there's a glaring omission on the HUD. Before I started playing the game, I modded out the game's minimap. Here's some of my Far Cry 6 gameplay where I've turned off so many options that it would take me 10 minutes to list them all. And this is Far Cry 5 gameplay
Insane.
from my last playthrough where I disabled the entire HUD. I always get rid of as many of these user experience elements in the open world games I play because they harm immersion. It wasn't so much that I didn't
It's nice that they included that option.
understand the
remove it.
Ubisoft formula as much as I saw it from another perspective. And as it turns out, when their games aren't telling you how to play them and spoiling all of their interesting locations, they are considerably more engaging. However, I believe that this is only part of people's real problem with Ubisoft's game design. Yes, their games are over-designed, and these incessant markers are counterproductive to all of the work put into bringing their worlds to life, but it's also how their worlds are presented, the way content is placed in them, and their world
Bro, yeah, I hate this shit. Like, it makes you feel like that you are just a retarded kid. This is how it feels like playing a Ubisoft game every single time. That's why I don't like it. This hand-holding, yeah.
pacing that lie at the core of this issue. And that brings us to Elden Ring. What is it that makes this game so special, especially in the context of open world oversaturation? From Software's approach to open world design is very different than Ubisoft's, and subsequently, most developers. Modern open world design is obsessed with telling the player where all of the game's content is. Unless you play your games like me, where you're forced to explore due to the removal of map markers, your exploration in these games consists of going from point A to point B. This is an aspect of Elden Ring's design that stuck out to me immediately. There are no predetermined map markers when you leave the Cave of Knowledge in Elden Ring. After the game establishes its conflict and your role in the story, the game's world is open to the player, and the only markers you get are when you discover locations or NPCs.
I really hope that Ubisoft learns from this.
This alone creates a completely different dynamic in how the player interacts with the world. Instead of the player already knowing what is where, which robs them of their curiosity, the player is allowed to speculate and determine where they want to go based on their own interests.
The thing is, this is really, really great on the first playthrough, but after that, man, you just do the main shit in Elden Ring, be honest. Like, I played for all the achievements, but the first playthrough was literally the best one, and after that it got really stale and boring, except for the legacy dungeons, which were quite fun. But this is why, in my opinion, linear games, which have like more open attachments to it instead of being a completely open world game, are 10 times better. Like I can play like something like Dark Souls 3 or something like Bloodborne, something like Dark Souls 2 and 1. I can play that shit over and over again. Like especially something like Sekiro, man. That's gonna be insane. But Elden Ring, man, I played all the achievements. The PvP is garbage, and I'm just gonna wait for the DLC. And that's it.
But that's not all. Ubisoft's games could do a system like this and still have the same problems they do now. What separates Elden Ring is that it makes the journey as important as the destination, with its inclusion of numerous emergent systems that simply don't exist in other open world games. Elden Ring makes you enjoy detours from your waypoint by littering its world with interesting and fulfilling content that is properly distributed around its map. This convinces the player that the world is alive, and that at any moment they could stumble onto a location that provides combat opportunities, lore, and rewards. Elden Ring's unique approach to side quests and the NPCs that give them to you is also paramount in making you.
Yeah, the problem with that thing in Elden Ring is like the main quest it's good, it's decent, above average, and the only side quest which was like interesting for me was the Alexander one, and every other one was like pretty boring. Maybe the Frenzied questline was a bit interesting, but the other ones, man, I don't know. I just watched some Vati videos about them when he tells a story like that. It's quite interesting, yeah, but experiencing that shit yourself in game is meh.
You believe that all of its content has equal importance. Far Cry 5 was the first Ubisoft game I played where NPCs talked about points of interest on the map. It increased immersion by making Hope County feel like it really had residents, and it was a new way to relay information to the player. The problem with this system is that it's only ever these generic, samey NPCs that give you this information. And besides being guns for hire, this was their only purpose in the world. Of course, once they would tell you about this location, it was marked on your map, and you immediately knew what was there and what the reward would be. Elden Ring executes this idea in a far more engaging manner. Instead of clones, the characters you find in Elden Ring have
They
distinct
literally had the same animation, man.
designs and feel very individual.
Oh yeah, I forgot about the Irani questline. That was good as well. But it was also a main questline, so I don't count it as side quest, I guess.
They don't randomly walk up to you and tell you exactly what you need to hear. You find them, help them out of a situation, and are sometimes required to exhaust their dialogue options to fully understand the quest they're giving you. Where most games clearly distinguish between NPC nobodies that give out quests and meaningful side characters, Elden Ring blurs the line and turns its quest givers into characters you're actually intrigued by and that you discover. None of this is to say that Ubisoft and Ubisoft-like open-world games don't have interesting side characters, but due to how they structure quest delegation and the content of said quests, it makes their open worlds feel empty and like most of the things you do in them are insignificant. Every time a map marker is placed in one of these games, it's effectively telling you that everything in the space between you and the marker doesn't matter. Elden
Yep.
Ring avoids this problem altogether by
Like
only
I'm
giving
a completionist. Even when I play something like those Ubisoft games or something similar to it, I try to 100% everything, and this is also why I ignore everything on the side. The only time I really enjoyed like truly exploring shit was in Elden Ring and in Skyrim. And after, I can't name you anything else which was like close to this.
you a marker where the NPC that gave you the quest is located, and not at the location of the quest itself. So why is it so easy for players to see the design of a Ubisoft open world? Putting aside map markers, why is it so easy to tell where important content is in these games and where blatantly meaningless content is? I believe this is mostly a gameplay scope issue. Elden Ring has combat. It has combat, and it has combat. Because FromSoft didn't have to waste time developing fishing, cockfighting, dominoes, or anything other than combat, they were able to spend more time creating enemies, personalizing their NPCs, designing intricate levels,
Yep.
and creating incredible...
Bro, Stormway Castle is such a perfect dungeon, especially for the first time playing it. It's insane.
world encounters.
Pretty underrated.
Ubisoft games actually have a lot more significant content than most realize. The problem is that it's spread very thin across worlds that are much larger than they should be. This is what creates areas of vast nothingness, and the game being forced to populate.
Yeah, this emptiness. You can even feel it sometimes in Elden Ring, but this emptiness is. It's just an area you ride through. It looks pretty, but yeah, that's it. You know. I would rather have something like if you don't know about this area, it's a special area in Dark Souls 3. If you play through the catacombs, you reach an area called Iryville, and for those who played it, man, you can't tell me. This moment was perfect when you saw that city for the first time. It was much greater than this stuff right here, like.
Populate these areas with simple loot, as it would be impossible to fill worlds this big with that much specialized content. A topic I don't see brought up much in these discussions is world pacing. World pacing is how much of the world a player experiences over time. Efficient world pacing gives the player enough activities in an area to complete and still be motivated to explore more. Inefficient world pacing overwhelms the player and makes them skip over content by burning them out. World pacing is determined by the size of the map, amount of activities per section you're in, and how interesting these activities are. Recent Assassin's Creed games have very poor world pacing because the player will open the map, see a billion things to do, and think that only a third of them may be worth doing. The player then has to calculate how much time they want to spend going around the map like a pinball. If they're not having fun this early into the game, then they're bound to get burnt out soon because the rest of the game is exactly like this, and they know it. World pacing is, admittedly, one of the most difficult things to get right in an open world game, because the player is ultimately who decides how much they want to explore and whether or not they like a game's things to do. Elden Ring has excellent world pacing, because despite doing combat over and over, it's an RPG that requires grinding and offers the player a multitude of different spots to do it in, along with what we've already mentioned about its quest and world design.
The only problem with that is getting over-leveled, and that makes most of content pretty easy and boring.
So it's not like Ubisoft games have never had good world pacing. Far Cry 3 has some of the best world pacing I have ever seen, and the reason it works so well in that game and less so in 5 and 6 is because it has a much smaller map and far more consistent story pacing to accompany it. These two things work in tandem to not exhaust the player and keep them entertained while they discover new things around the world. The obvious question then is, why are Ubisoft's modern maps so big. I do think there's some legitimate reasoning here. Part of the reason why I love their games is because they do an excellent job of making me believe I'm really in the place the game has created. Size is the most direct way of conveying this. Hope County and Yara feel like real places because they are the size of real places, which allows them to showcase neighborhoods, factories, farms, jungles, lakes, and much more. There may not be a lot to do in these places, but there is a lot to see, and an element of digital tourism in a game is not a bad thing, especially when the game's characters are so culturally tied to the spaces they inhabit. The key is balance, and while some people enjoy the size of new Assassin's Creed maps, I believe these games are clearly imbalanced and alienate players who want to cut through the filler and have a much tighter experience. And this is why we are so tired of these games. They're not getting any smaller, they all have the same presentation, and Ubisoft's formula, as I mentioned before, has permeated the industry. I recently started playing Horizon Zero Dawn, and yes, it is a good game, but if you told me that it was a Ubisoft game, I'd have believed you, because it plays exactly like them, despite having another developer. I also said that
what? I thought it was from Ubisoft.
Ubisoft's games are over-designed, and Horizon suffers from the same problems. Take a look at this. This plant is already designed to stick out from the rest of the foliage. There's also a marker telling you that it's a special plant, along with an interaction prompt. Why do I need 3 elements to tell me the same thing? I've never turned off the HUD quicker in any game than Horizon Zero Dawn. Now look at Elden Ring. It's just a plant. You can pick it up. I'm not going to pretend like user experience and user interface design is not important. It absolutely is, but modern games have crossed the line from convenience into micromanaging the player's experience. Players are tired of hand-holding and a lack of engaging content. That's why Elden Ring has been so successful. It's a game that clearly respects the player's intelligence and is remarkably well designed to boot. This is all coming from someone who really likes the Ubisoft games, but even I acknowledge that it's time for a change. Luckily, the industry goes where the money goes, and while I do anticipate that Elden Ring will teach developers a few new tricks, I'm more hopeful that it simply reminds them that it's okay to let players think for themselves.
Thank you. I am. What a great video. This dude DX. So subscribe to him. And that's it, man. I completely agree with him. Like, it's insane. But with such a thing which has been overlooked for so many years, and you all hope that Elden Ring changed everyone's mind. And over the next 2 years, we should see better Ubisoft games. I hope so, at least. I guess that's it. And I would really appreciate something like a comment, a like, a sub even. And I guess see you next time. Wafer out.